Good morning, Christina. Can you hear us?
I can.
Oh, and we can see you too.
So just for the record, we do not have live streaming capabilities this morning. That'll be fixed later, and this video will be uploaded later.
Fabulous. Okay. All right. So having accomplished some overcome some technical difficulties, more or less, let's get this going. So I would like to call this Parks, Recreation, and Greenways Board meeting to order on February 4th, 2025 at 9:03 a.m. We do have a quorum in person, and Christina Colt would like to join us remotely due to the plague. And do I need a motion for her to join us
You
remotely?
do.
We do. All right. So in that case, I move to allow Christina to join us remotely today. Do I hear a second? All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? Passes. All right. Welcome, Christina. You've been approved. Okay, so moving on to the usual stuff. After looking over the agenda, if anybody doesn't have any changes, I move that we adopt the agenda as presented. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, excellent. Motion passes unanimously. And having gone over the previous minutes, I move to adopt the previous minutes as presented. Do I hear a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Awesome. Moving right along. All right. We don't have any public.
No
Sign up
public is
today?
in attendance, so no comment.
All right. No public, no comment. Let's move on to reports and updates. Tyler, you're up first.
What's up, everybody? April 12th, Easter egg hunt. That'll be in the morning. We're going to do 3 different age groups in different time slots. So the event's going to start at 10 a.m. That'll be like 0 to 3-year-olds. I say 0 years old, but you know what I mean. Following that, about 10:45, it'll be 4 to 6-year-olds. And then at 11:30, it'll be 7 and older. It'll just be at Marvin Eford Park, out in the big lawn area across from the barn. The idea right now is we'll have a petting zoo up in the smaller lawn beside the barn. And I'm thinking the Easter Bunny will be hopping around. So that's something to look forward to. It'll be hopefully a big event. That's kind of that's the Saturday before Easter weekend. Hoping for a big turnout. I kind of assume that's when most people will be doing it. But I think we'll still have a good pool there.
Yeah, as long as weather cooperates, we should be good.
Yeah. It's probably already calling for rain. Marvin Day, April 26th. That'll be from 4 to 9 at Marvin Eford Park again. You'll find that on our website, on our social media. We'll have a page dedicated to Marvin Day to kind of tell you all about what's going on and what we're going to have. And then following that, May 31st is when we are going to do our 5K. That will be starting at Marvin Elementary School. And it'll run the same route it always has. It'll run that loop through the neighborhood, come back out onto the Greenway coming up Marvin School Road. We'll have a little health fair out there. We'll have some coffee truck. It's a good little hangout, nice and early in the morning. And you'll see that online. That'll be a run sign up. You'll have to register online for that. And it will cost.
Do we know what that cost is going to be?
I cannot remember right this second.
No worries.
I know what it was
It'll be on
last
there.
year, but it may be
change.
different
Yeah.
this year. But yeah. That's about as far out as events we got right now.
Okay, fantastic. All right, any questions for Tyler on events? All right, hearing none. Let's move on to Trails and Greenways report.
Yeah.
Do we have any developments on that?
Nothing major. We are working towards Tullamore Phase 4. There are still some things we're working on there, so nothing's really moving forward quite yet for construction. But there is work being done on behind closed doors, trying to get some
Yep.
stuff
Processes or processing?
processing.
On phase 4, is that still spring targeted? I know it sounds like there's still work being done or.
Ideally, it'd be done this fiscal year, but there's several boxes we have to check before trying to do our due diligence. So I will keep you guys posted on where we stand.
So that one's still in process and no significant movement on any of the others. All right, cool. All right, Public Works report. Davey, what you got for us?
There's really nothing to speak on this month. We have not been working on any projects per se in Public Works, in the park or on the trails, but I do have one agenda item later on that we'll be discussing that does pertain to Public Works. But yeah,
All right.
we've been dealing with inclement weather issues over the last few weeks or so.
No kidding. No, absolutely. All right, yeah, we'll get to that other bit later in the agenda. All right, Village Council report. Oh, did you- I'm sorry.
David, for public, I just wanted to just kind of.
Oh, that's right, yes.
I just want to publicly
I'm sorry.
acknowledge the work that your team has done on the greenways. And I probably walk the greenways 2 or 3 times a week on various paths, and it's just been just so consistently well maintained, and it just makes it so much more accessible and enjoyable the way that you have maintained, especially at the Tullamore Loop. I know there's a lot of overage there, but I would just say that I have noticed just the surface is consistent, and just want to thank you and your team for that.
Well, thank you for that. We've made a concerted effort to spend more time on the trails. Superintendent and I do a monthly inspection of all the trails and document any issues. And we've been able to dedicate more time for our staff to go out and clear and make any repairs to any issues we find. So thank you for
It's very
recognizing
noted.
that.
Mhm.
It's notable.
Probably helps too when you're not doing as much mowing and stuff. So as we get into mowing season, the better we can get the trails in shape, over the winter, I think it'll
Absolutely.
definitely help as we get into spring and summer where they're moving back to other tasks.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other comments? Okay. John, Village Council report?
Just a couple of different items. One will be on the agenda today, so I'll save that a little bit, but we talked about specifically the loop and scenes that we have for that.
Mhm.
Another thing that was discussed, and this is also kind of wrapped into, our ongoing update and review of the Parks and Greenways Master Plan.
Mhm.
We did have some discussion with Hunter, and he's still doing some of the due diligence to determine whether or not we're still gonna kind of have those broken up into separate plans, whether it be the Heritage District or whether we wrap them into a comprehensive master plan. So
Mhm.
as we kind of continue through that, it shouldn't, have much of a difference as far as, the granular level that we get into the thing.
Mhm.
But just, we're just wanted to make sure you're aware that we're still weighing the different options.
Mhm.
Hunter's going out and looking for, how some other villages, towns, cities may have done it one way or the other.
Mhm. So going forward, we're going to continue to tackle, we're going to look at this document and continue a trajectory of revising this document with the idea of it's going to be a similar document. And then if it gets wrapped into a bigger thing, that's just sort of a chapter in a larger, in a larger body, is my impression.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I'd say is that, from a council perspective, we did also have the retreat, which I believe was prior to our last meeting. That was an opportunity for essentially, council to get a better understanding as we head into our budgeting year, all of the different needs that, Parks and Greenways or Public Works, kind of see as their priorities. We talked about that a little bit, when Davey and some folks had made presentations here before, but, we get down inside, whether it be equipment type needs, whether it be programming type needs, things like that. But it really was a productive couple of days. And I think it's also very helpful for them as village staff, you know, like Austin's got needs for software, he's got needs.
Mhm.
But
I always need
sometimes
software.
they have to live in their own silos and deal with their day-to-day. You know, and we've only got a certain amount of, you know, budget dollars that, you know, are gonna be able to. So I think it's also helpful to them to gain a better understanding of what those other departments' needs are too. And,
Mhm.
you know, when something doesn't get approved, if it does get approved, it's not, you know, just them, whether we want them to have something or not, but how it fits into all the budget priorities and needs that the village has to consider. So, I think that was a really good session for us and, productive.
Yeah, that sounds very helpful to get all of it out at one time and consider it all together in one piece. That is all, there is an audio recording of the retreat, correct?
Yeah, well, it's not just the audio, there was a whole presentation that it
Oh,
kind
okay.
of followed along with presentations by each of the groups.
Okay.
So if you want to go online, it's not just audio, you can see, the
Okay.
slideshow that corresponded with it.
Okay.
It's just not, you know, the video of the particular.
It's very long. There's 10 hours of audio.
Mhm.
The audio is not the best in certain points. We're going to work on that
I was
again for
gonna say,
next
we're
year.
learning to
We need
tackle that.
we need better microphones and a better setup. So we're gonna work on that for next year. But yeah.
Okay.
Is it bookmarked at all, like some of our
Day,
meetings are?
day one, should be, because you can only tie one video into eScribe, but I'm working on the minutes now. I should have the minutes done. My goal is on Friday. And then to have you guys approve those next week. Though I might need to push that off to the work session to finish them. But once the minutes are published, they'll have timestamps for all 3 days. So.
And then it'll be easier. to
Yeah, much
get.
easier if you want to find something that's, you know, you're particularly interested in to go listen to that discussion. So, yeah, I just wanted to, you know, let the board know that, you know, there's, you know, the opportunity to go listen to that if you really want to. So, all right, fantastic. So that is, and any questions for John about Village Council report? All right. Moving along today to our unfinished business then. So we are going to continue our review of the 2020 Parks and Rec Greenway Master Plan. And also finally, hopefully get a chance to talk about a little bit more about the survey questions that we've been kind of pushing off previously. So I hope everybody had an opportunity to read through chapter 4. This is where our existing master plan kind of gets into the nitty gritty of actual stuff as opposed to talking about parameters and everything. If I'll just kind of go page by page for the moment. The first several pages are our trail types, and I'm not really going to discuss any of that here. And the reason for that is that I'm going to leave that to the people who are experts in that. And, you know, so if we send it to a vendor or, you know, whatever, then they are better able to determine what the appropriate trail types or trail standards would be. And I know we need to incorporate some stuff we already kind of have on the side. And so all of that will get brought in but what I mean by on the side is that, you know, there have been, you know, some specifications we've developed since the last time this was done. And so those can get pulled in. But I know that I am not in any position to dictate what
Yeah, but-
exactly those construction methods should be. And if anybody else here is, then I welcome you to, you know, confer when we send this to a vendor.
I did have
What-
a question. Oh, go ahead.
What I would add to that is that one of the things, you know, that we have, you know, we've learned lessons over time too. And, you know, we've learned things because some of the folks that we've worked with are just construction companies that are part of developing a development that don't
Right.
necessarily do trails all the time, you know, whether it be natural or
Right,
paved or
if
asphalt.
the developer is the one installing the thing, then.
Yeah, you know, other times, you know, we've worked with trail builders. Some of them are just construction guys like the developers, or sometimes they've been actual companies that specialize in trails. And we found, especially in working with them, some best practices that they've found, over time working, with a lot of different municipalities on trails and stuff. And we've picked up things with them as well. So, it's sometimes more of an art than a science, because when you're talking about the trails too, there's unique characteristics, to them. Some of them are inside flood zones. Some of them are, just out in the open along, a main thoroughfare or different things like that. So, we'll have those different kind of standards, but there's always going to be some leeway that you have to have, in terms of making it fit the right environment and coming up with the best product.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the specifics that I would, defer to experts or people who are better versed in that than I. I think our job here, and we'll get to it more specifically in a minute, is to come up with the uses that we anticipate so that we can tell, the vendor, we're anticipating walking or biking or, whatever it may be. And then they can say, if you're going to make a biking trail, this is what it looks like. If you're going to make a, sidewalk type, trail, then this is what that looks like.
So my question on, I'm sorry, this was classifications. It wasn't specific to what we have here in Marvin, correct? Because that's why I think there was no correlation. I was trying to take that and say, okay, what path is which here? But it seems like it just was telling you all your options I mean, I guess
Yes.
it's not
It was
specific.
more of a general description of the
Right.
different types of trails
Correct.
that you
So I'm
typically
trying
find.
to understand,
Yeah.
how would you classify Eford versus Tullamore? Is it the same? Do they seem kind of the same? Or, I mean, is it easier for us to only have several types and not 5 to maintain? I was just wondering about that too. Do we want to, there's only so many uses we're going to have anyway.
Well, I think part of it too was also because developers do
Okay, on
some of the
both.
development of those. It was to have something out there so they at least have kind of an idea, of the different, things, so that sometimes maybe before they even come to the village of Marvin they can at least have some guidelines that they can work around to kind of know what would be expected.
So less so for what we're developing, maybe more so when you said some third party or developer. Okay.
Well, yeah, so, and one of my goals for this document when it gets revised is to incorporate those things. And maybe it is like this where it's sort of a menu, but then we're at least consistent with regard to if a developer is doing it versus we're doing it. The same set of instructions is going to the people who are putting it in, that it's this kind. So these don't necessarily map to like, this is Marvin Loop and only Marvin Loop, or, whatever. But if
That's what I
we're,
wasn't- yeah,
but amongst the things wherever it's determined that, like, hey, we're going to put this in, which type of path would be best? Well, what are our uses? Okay, well, this path supports those uses, so let's use that one. And so at least across those, it's consistent. Your question points up something that overall I had an issue with when I was reading this chapter, is that this chapter is very generic and not very specific to the village of Marvin. And that's also something that, when we send this to a vendor again, is that I would like to have this to be a little bit more directed specifically to what we're anticipating. For example, when you go to, one of the typical uses of a park, or, possible uses for a park, it includes things like ice skating rinks and or marinas. And we just don't have those things and don't really anticipate having those things, I don't think. So it would be nice to have this structured more directly, that if we have similar classifications, that the things listed under there more accurately reflect things we're actually considering. So leaving the surface issues, we get into the park classifications, and I would like to propose a framework for this. I mean, obviously, if you look at the introduction of this is based on some sort of guidelines. So, the Mertz and Hall's Park Recreation and Open Space Guidelines, and I don't know who Mertz and Hall are, but with all due deference to, people who have, made this a study, I'm not going to go and reinvent the wheel. But what I did take away from this was that and so what I think we need to get the vocabulary clear. And one of the things that was confusing to me in this is the interchange of, in one of the classifications here of usable public open space versus green space versus not used open space. And so for me, at least in my mind, and you know, this can be a point of discussion, is for me, green space is sort of an overarching umbrella, you know, terminology. And that for me, green space, that term indicates pretty much anything that's predominantly non-built. It may include low impact built elements like, you know, like a trail or, you know, I think depending on how low impact it is, you know, like fitness stations or, you know, other sort of intrusive but low impact, you know, built things, but you can still consider it green space if it's predominantly, you know, green. And so for me, that was where green space sat, and interchanging that with open space to me just, I don't know, the word open implies like grand vistas and clearing or something like that. And so I found that to be a less useful term, and I'd like to kind of confine it to one. For me anyway, unless anybody disagrees, green space to me is a very umbrella term under which a whole bunch of these things exist. And then outside of green space would be your more developed uses that would fall into parks and recreational, where kind of a little overlap with park. If your park is generally, we might call it a park, but if it's pickleball courts, I would not call that green space. Or if it's, you know, a hard court.
Is that more the definition of the park though, passive park versus a recreational park? I
Well,
mean,
you can have, right, so that's where I'm saying there's a little bit of overlap. Because some parks I would consider as green space if they incorporate more green than develop, right? I mean, I think a park with a lawn can still be considered green space because you've got green. But if you have a park that, say, for example, ends up like the pocket park becoming a pickleball court, for example, it's still a park. It's still in our list of parks, but for me, that doesn't count towards green space per se. Or if we have an aquatic center, or if we have a sports or a community center, those are buildings, not green space. So all of those still fall under our purview as either green or as recreation.
So I'm not maybe following, we're trying to develop categories for our parks, right? And like, as you said, a park could be a facility or it could be a, maybe help me understand, Jen. Are we trying to identify categories so that as we have future plans or even the existing pieces, we're going to map them to it? Are we trying to define those categories or just leverage what's here? And maybe you're trying to clarify them a little more. I'm not following what we're.
Yeah, I would say in the past, it was really two classifications that we kind of put them in.
Yeah.
Active and passive, you know, areas for parks. Now, a greenway is a little bit different because, or a green space, as you say, because there may be certain parts of land, you know, whether it's something that was given to us, you know, by a developer as they develop, and it may not make sense for park or greenway or anything like that. But it's important to consider those too, just because, you know, we want to continue to maintain tree canopy and stuff like that as well, you know? So, you know, I would say that, you know, we want to look at green space, but, you know, whether we needed a specific, you're talking about it as an
So
overarching.
here's the issue is that we need to be what I'm trying to establish is we need to amongst ourselves have a terminology that we agree on. And the issue I have with green space is that it tends to be used so freely with a lot of different ideas in mind. So is green space to you just anything that's green that breaks up development? Is green space anything that is left completely natural and has no uses inside it? And for me, I'm proposing where my brain wants to go, and I'm open to counter suggestions, but at least with regard to when we use green space, my inclination would be to use that as a very umbrella term for anything, including greenways and parks. So they would exist underneath that umbrella term as anything that is more predominantly undeveloped.
One
than
one thing,
developed.
one only thing to consider, some of those terms do have planning and ordinance connotations. So you would want to make sure we would obviously would check with Hunter.
Exactly,
that it-
and
that it
that
is
is
consistent.
something that we definitely need to clarify, because when I was reading this document and like we've talked about, like as a survey question, what does green space mean?
Mhm.
And so we do need to, I haven't looked it up in the ordinance, and I apologize for not doing that before this meeting. But at least using what was in the plan here, it's used interchangeably with green space and the word open space. And I found that sort of problematic just because it's confusing. Which one are you using? What do they mean? And both can have things in them and both can be not used at all. So yes, Christina, go.
Could we just defer to whatever the ordinance definitions are?
We can.
I agree with your I get your problem. And
Mhm.
it's worse when you talk about unusable versus usable open space and on it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Could we start with whatever Hunter calls it?
Yes,
Use a term.
actually, we can go through the ordinance and, you know, kind of report back as to what terminology we're going to use.
I'll bet somewhere there's a terminology sort of
There's
list. I mean, we don't
definitions in
need
the
all of
ordinance.
it, just basics.
Yeah,
So
well, and
I'm
there's
speaking about the
definitions.
same thing, to your point.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitions in the ordinance and we can pull those out. So just for purposes of today, I do, what I'm seeing here is a distinction between green space, like I said, as kind of an umbrella term, and then greenways, which the way in it, as it indicates here, linear parks, and it talks about trails, being within those linear parks, is to me, the way in greenway indicates a thoroughfare, of some kind. So at least going on what, without checking the ordinance to see if it agrees with this, going on what's in this document, the greenways seem to be sort of their own item under this larger concept. And that's why I was trying to parse that,
Okay.
is that
Yeah,
greenways are
right.
not, they're like a lower category of either the green or the open space. Yeah, subcategory.
Not lower, like as not as important, but.
No,
like
no, no,
everything.
no, no, a
It's a
subcategory. No,
subcategory,
absolutely.
yes.
Under that, and they imply a specific thing.
Right.
So to
And
get the,
emphasize the connections and the usage and trail, right? I mean, that's how they defined it, right?
that is how it's
Yeah.
defined in this document. And obviously, like I said, I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel. I just had issues with the green space, open space, blah, blah, blah. But as far as greenways go, this document, and as long as it's in agreement with our ordinances, which if it's not, that's something we need to address. A greenway, by definition, is something that is connective as opposed to a green space that has another use like a park
You're
or,
concerned about the terminology. I would just make note of that because once we bring that vendor on, we can, you know, express, we
Exactly.
can express the board's opinion on the plan in general and make that as part of our guidance to look into look in that terminology, make sure it's consistent with both our ordinances, but is also more descriptive of what we're actually looking for.
yeah, exactly. And so that was sort of my point to have on the table here. So to get to, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the trails or the greenways per se, not because they aren't important, but because the bulk of this document already addresses them. We already have.
And I think it was well spelled out here. I don't think there's as many questions on that as maybe the park definition. I
Yes,
thought.
and so that's what I want to get to more specifically, but before we do, I didn't want to like just completely railroad over for trail. So just wanted to note for the record that I have some issues with terminology that I think we'll need to wrestle with later. The map that I gave you today is a work in progress. We're hoping to create this into a like poster sized board for reference
And
and pointing at physically.
Do you want me to share this on screen for Christina or does she have it?
She's seen it. Yeah, she has.
Okay, I want to make sure.
I've got it.
Christina, we have a couple of the zoomed in ones with the changed colors, but I know you have the zoomed out one that includes all of Marvin.
It's fine.
I do notice a few issues on here that could be corrected, just,
The typo in Eford Park?
well, yes, there's that. You're missing a few parcels that are in our limits. Sedgefield, the subdivision is partially in, partially out.
Yeah, we're working on that so that the layout of the blue spaces that indicate the neighborhoods was taken directly from county GIS. So we'll have to figure out how to manipulate those because I also noticed that there are certain parcels missing from like specific
Yeah,
parcels that are missing. from
there's a
neighborhood.
few subdivisions in here that really aren't in Marvin. Your question mark there on Providence Road, that's the courtyards at Marvin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the courtyards of Marvin is next to it, but then there's another
That's
boundary.
Willow Creek and Providence Ridge.
Is it?
Yeah, what you got labeled as courtyards is Willow Creek, Providence Ridge.
Yeah.
So these are things, obviously, we didn't have time before this meeting to create a very pristine draft. This is, like I said, a work in progress. We will continue to refine this. And if you do, as you're looking at it, have any comments like, oh, that's way too hard to read, or that's confusing, or whatever, let me know, because we are working on trying to refine this into something that's useful. I also noted that, the connector trail that is proposed for potentially connecting the towns of Ardrey, which we talked about last meeting, is shown as complete, but it's not.
That's also
And-
not the route. That's
and-
probably not the
and-
route.
Yeah, exactly. So we have some work to do on this.
Just one thing too.
Yeah.
You see Marvin Acres and Oak Brook there.
Yes.
That is actually connected. So Marvin is contiguous through that.
Villages, but it's the neighbor. So this is just a map of neighborhoods, not the
Okay.
boundaries of the village. And that's one thing we will probably have to do, is add the boundary of the village to this.
Yeah,
This was created just by pulling the neighborhoods.
gotcha.
So if there is undeveloped, non-named neighborhoods, undeveloped parcels in between, they don't show here.
You're missing a couple other smaller neighborhoods, but we can work on that.
Yeah, so over the next month or so, we'll continue to add and refine to this. So as you're looking at it, make notes, send me notes. I'm open to notes.
But I do agree this, especially for the folks, I mean, I've been in and out of this stuff for many years, but for a lot of people's just recognizing, where some of the smaller subdivisions are, I think this is helpful for you guys and,
Yep, Christina?
and a good exercise.
I think obviously we need to fix the problems, and adding the outline of Marvin. How did we not think of that? That's a good idea. But the big thing here was to try to get the neighborhoods in that labeled, so that when we talk about wherever Marvin Creek, we see where it really is. The other big thing was to have two different colors for the spine versus the connector trails, and a different look for proposed versus existing, so that you can just at a glance get the idea that this is, a proposed trail versus already done. And so I think it does that really well. The colors work well, and the believe it or not, we talked about line widths for an hour. So-
No, spine means it's sort of a central artery. The spine is typically the ones that are roadside and this isn't
Like the loop.
this is not like the hard and fast definition,
Okay.
but typically
Okay.
these are going to be the ones that are roadside and will be paved like a sidewalk.
Okay. So probably these definitions would be good to have here too.
Another
Yes.
good point. Yeah. But we were
Um,
just trying to show the difference between all of that. And I think we're closer than we were.
Yes, we are working ahead.
Thank you for doing this.
So with this map, and it just reflects sort of obviously with some errors, a loose current status on our trails. So if people, you guys have all had opportunities to look at our trail maps, our proposed maps or whatever. At this point, where we are in this process, I would just love to know if anybody has any strong feeling. This is mostly done. Do you have any objections or concerns or additions that you've been feeling really strongly about as you've gotten to know the underlying map in the master plan over the last, few months? Then we can note it now. But for the most part, it just really needs to be updated to where we are current process, unless anybody has specific concerns.
My concern, I guess, and again, maybe going back to definition, is if you
Mhm.
publish this where you say proposed, right? So proposed, does that, what's the definition of proposed? Proposed means it was just brought up as an idea, it was in the CIP. I guess there's various levels of where you could be in the proposed, even from the we saw in the plan. from
By
prior.
being in this plan, it's proposed
but I'm
for
just-
to
No,
a certain
no, I
extent.
understand.
And
I'm
then it
just
goes,
saying,
but yeah, you want to
if
see
you
a
put this-
definition
If you
somewhere.
put this up as poster size, the first question is gonna be who proposed it and where is it in the process,
Yeah.
right? So I just think that's a
So
really.
the original proposal
Yeah.
kind of would go back to when a master plan was first kind of
Someplace
created,
somewhere,
which
yeah.
I think was probably around in 2007, 2008,
Yeah.
timeframe. Don't quote me on that. But essentially at that time, what groups were tasked with was kind of taking a look, because at that point, still a lot of Marvin was undeveloped, and one of the issues that we found is that, if people, moved into an area or something, we wanted to make sure that they knew that there could be proposed trails there, because it's always harder to try to put something in later than something that's already out there on a plan, on a map, and so forth. So, and some of them were laid out because it was kind of assumed, okay, when that developer develops that big property, there's, a natural opportunity there, with the way that we created our ordinances to connect this area to that area and so forth. And then other areas of it, there were different designations that they looked at back at that time for different types of paths.
So originating
Some are
in
natural, but
20, like you said, back in 2007, that would be originally, but like something like Marvin Estates, which is less than 2 years old, that proposed would have come from the developer. That's what I'm just wondering.
Well, no,
like,
it was always, it was already on the, so
Even
that's
be-
the whole point, is
even
that it was
before
on the
Marvin-
2008.
Even Marvin Estates that didn't exist?
Yep.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
why these,
Okay,
that's, so
yes,
that's why these
okay.
are so forward. So
Okay, okay.
to your point,
Yes.
no,
right.
it's an excellent point.
Mhm.
So to your point, and it's harder to see on here because I'm having issues with the layers.
Mhm.
But one of the proposed connector trails follows Newtown Road across this entire thing.
Mhm.
None of that is Marvin.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
that is proposing that in the future, should we annex,
Mhm.
that is a good place to have a trail because it would connect other areas of Marvin
Mhm.
to our park,
Gotcha.
which
I
is the
meant-
only
yeah,
thing we own.
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean Marvin Estates. I meant that new one that. is
And
east of
keep in
Marvin.
mind,
Oh, no, I
annex-
know,
Okay,
yes.
Okay, yeah. Mhm.
And keep in mind, that was a wholly different PRG board.
Yes.
There was a PRG board prior to this one kind of being reconstituted in like 2011, 2012. But they did a lot of that work. And keep in mind also, even annexation laws are quite different than they were, back at the time that some of these things were developed.
And I think, oh, yeah, Christina.
Oh, I was just gonna say, in my mind, proposed means not built. But then there's all these versions of what that means, to Christina's point. But if you
Yes.
look on page 40, there's a lovely extensive database, let's call it that, spreadsheet of all these trails that are either built,
Mhm.
proposed, programmed, existing, whatever you want to call it. So to me, Christina's question is answered with something that's a lot more detailed and more
Correct.
spreadsheety,
That's
right?
right.
But I get your point. But to me, the definition, and maybe I'm wrong, it's either built or it's not built.
Okay, that's fair. And then you've got the data behind there. So that's.
Yes, and
that's
so-
Exactly.
part. Okay, so.
Yeah, so.
Instead of trying to put it all on here and ending up with 37 colors that we can't discern.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We'll put an asterisk that said, asterisk that says, refer to. So, you can look at this map and see some of the proposed ones and be like, well, why in the world would we have a huge trail along Newtown Road on our map? But you can also see that it connects west to east properties and, it would connect Village Hall to our park. And so while that does not seem super feasible right now, it is definitely something to hold a place for the future, and that's part of the purpose of this plan, so.
Yeah,
And I could
it's
see
important to think.
potentially, I could
I
see
was
an
just gonna say-
overlay. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's important to think that we're not just trying to lay this out here for 3, 5, 10 years, but this is, more 50 years, because, there may be certain pockets that don't get developed, and you wouldn't want the village of Marvin to develop something that eventually will probably be developed by a developer,
Right, exactly. Okay, Christina?
I could see another overlay, not on this map, but when we were sort of talking about transparent overlays on top of this, that would be
Yes.
another detail that would label, just like page 40 does. I can't remember some of the, like C1 or whatever, And it would
Yes.
tell you what that particular trail number was so that you could go back to this spreadsheet.
Really, really fast, we only had chapter 4 on the agenda for today. So I do want to make sure we're staying within that discussion.
So
Gotcha.
this, so with regard to the trails, so this was everybody's first opportunity to look at this map, work in progress. This is not a 100% replacement for what will be in, when we get later in the chapter, there's the actual map with the C4s and the C1s and all of that. This is not specifically a replacement for that. This is a visual aid for use to use when we don't know what neighborhood is what, when they come in and they're like, courtyards at Marvin, and we're all like, I don't drive by that. Where is that? So that's the purpose of this map, is not as a planning document per se is incorporated in this plan, but a visual aid for us to use. So this is just your introduction to that. With regard to the trails, if you, as we go through this process, if, we need to backtrack and you're like, oh, hey, I really think we need a trail here. That's cool. And we can come back and do it. What I'd like to get to with regard to trails and the purpose of chapter 4 is it suggests some uses for our trails. So with regard to greenways and the trails that are in them, like I was saying, I'd like this document ultimately to be more specific to what we contemplate. What are the uses that you would consider for our trails as being something we should pursue? So the document itself already has a few suggestions in it, for walking, jogging, biking. One thing that used to be in consideration but was removed when this plan was done was equestrian trails. And then there are certain built elements that they could incorporate, which would be fitness stations, benches, dog waste stations, and signage, like for, identifying trees and natural features. So is there anything in that list that, gives you the heebie-jeebies and you're saying, take that off? Or is there anything that you would add to that?
I think the other thing, it's not specific on that, but I like in this, it emphasized the connections to our parks. It was a means to get somewhere. You don't have to always, but the idea that, like the preserve trail takes you to the new town park or wherever you go. I mean,
Yes.
I'm not saying you always have to have a destination, but I think it does kind of associate with, you're going to invest in one to have the other there.
Yes, definitely the way it's laid out in the current plan, it definitely emphasized the transportation aspect.
I guess that's what
Yes,
you're
for
taking
sure.
this trail to get to.
Yes, it did. It really highlighted the transportation aspect. Yeah.
So, so when you say like fitness equipment, do you mean like a fitness trail or?
Yeah, I mean, is that something that you, like, when you say fitness trail, what is in your mind? What do you envision?
This one in Valentine, that's just like, would it be similar to that? That was the question. It was just like a bunch of like
Mhm.
exercising equipment, like, or it's just like, yes, it's simple, but you
Mhm.
know.
I'm not familiar with the one in
Oh.
Valentine, but
Where they might have like 10 different stations
Yeah.
that you could do pull-ups or
that's what
things
I'm
like that.
anticipating. That's kind of what is in my mind when I'm thinking of that. So is that something that we think that, we would want, in the village? So what we need to do is we need to build a list of things that when we send this to a vendor is, contemplated usages as a sort of menu. So we can leave that list just sort of as I rattled it off. But if anybody, dog walking, we know what people do, walking, obviously, jogging, kind of the same thing. I know we have some people who do biking. So, in fact, when I was walking one of the trails recently, there were a lot of bike tracks. So maybe we want to look at developing, that use because it definitely seems to be a demand in the community for that because they're already doing it. But we need to check in with, the bikers, and find out, if that's suiting their needs or how best to do that. So, if anybody doesn't have any, do you have?
No, Christina, I'm just.
Oh, Christina's, yep, thank you. Go ahead, Christina.
Do we really need to get to this level of detail in order to find somebody to help us do a master plan? I like Christina's idea that we want to talk about greenways that are for walking, but for also going from point to point. That kind of bigger picture makes more sense to me than Well, and you know, not worrying about the horses or deciding to worry about the horses. I mean, I guess you can decide that at some point, but I feel like we're getting to a level of detail that I'm not sure that we need to worry about before we go forth and try to find somebody to help us do this. But
Maybe I would like to start aggregating some people's thoughts as to what they'd like to see in the community. Not that this is a definition of exactly what, but when we hand it over to a vendor, I'd like not to get stuff back that, you know, is ice skating rinks and splash pads. So if we have sort of
well, yeah,
and we could always edit that out if we get something back, but it would be, you know, I just want to get people thinking about, you know, what kind of uses do they contemplate as being inconsistent with the vision? And these are not like, oh, these are gonna, if we list them now, it's gonna be included. But with regard to, you know, trail usages, what are we anticipating those having? So throw out some options and, you know, I'll keep them in because they're included in the notes from last time. You know, under trails, we had things about, you know, dog waste stations and educational signages and stuff like that. So it's in a list. And we can revisit that stuff in the future. So addressing the parks, our current inventory is we have 4 parks. They are all located along Newtown Road. So the 4 parks that we have are Eford Park, of course. We have the Pocket Park at Publix. And then we have Village Hall Park, which you guys have seen the plans for development on that. And then we have the little pocket park with very amorphous. I mean, we have a size, it's about 2.5 acres. But yeah, over here at Heritage of Marvin at the roundabout, those are our 4 parks, obviously the very, very small ones.
Does that fall in the mini park category?
Well, and
Well,
if we
some
want to
understand
keep
that.
with, if we want to keep, I mean, this has a mini park category and this has a neighborhood park category and a single-use park category. I didn't find these categories to be especially useful for how the Village of Marvin is laid out per se. I mean, I guess that Eford would count as a neighborhood park and these others would count as mini parks. On the other hand, there's some overlap because the Pocket Park at Marvin is really, really mini, but we're contemplating putting a pickleball court in there, so that becomes a single-use park. So these,
Yeah, the reason I was thinking about the definition is
Mhm.
yeah, going ahead with the survey, when you ask about, do we want to have pickleball? And I think last
Mhm.
meeting we said, oh, gee, not a Deford Park. But I think if you have a real good definition so that when you ask a question, you know, I might say no to pickleball because I think the only park we have in our village is Eford, right? But if we have a clear definition that Eford is passive, it's this versus
Mhm.
recreational. I think, so whatever that definition is, I think it's easier to make decisions if you don't kind of the use of one, especially our biggest asset would be Eford, right? That we have that well defined, so.
So,
Versus just community park, you know, there's more community passive park maybe, or whatever those words are that define it better.
yeah, no, I think the definitions need a little bit of refinement because, like I said, I found this to be sort of generic and not necessarily super specific to how we do it. And then, you know, there's also the possibility that when we're talking about parks as not a greenway where there's an intention to be a thoroughfare of some kind, but as a type of green space where, you know, the use is different, that some of the parks, I know that this little pocket park over here at Heritage, part of it is not really accessible to anything, you know? And so maybe that is one of those that just doesn't get any use, which is always an option as well on the menu. So Christina, what would you like to see? Where would you like to see us take this discussion for the parks? I mean, we have an inventory. I think the one thing that came to me while I was looking at this is that we kind of need a park for South Marvin. You know, the stuff that's not directly connected to Newtown Road. So I would, you know, maybe put in some guidance for, you know, searching out a potential park location or at least being open to one should something come up. But at this level of detail or, you know, at this point in this discussion, what would you like to see us try to resolve?
In order to get an RFP or RFP, I'm gonna call it RFP, together, it seems to me that one of our requests is the people who are gonna do this understand what Marvin is like, right? They come and visit it. It's not that alien a concept, right? But it is a little unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And that we want, well, depends on our survey results, doesn't it? And we're getting to that in a minute. We
Yep.
think we want trails and parks, and if we go with what we've known in the past, that we want more green space that's available to the public in various shapes and sizes and locations, and that they help us go down that path. That's kind of their job, at least in my understanding. So that from our survey results, we're able to say, this is what the public wants, more of this, less of that, you know, and,
Right.
but without that, those survey results, we're kind of, I mean, we can, you know, I don't know what to talk about, right? If we don't know what people want. I know what I
Well-
want, but that's not good enough.
Okay, well then that's a good point. And actually, so let's move on to the discussion of the survey questions. And the reason I'm sort of asking for a little bit of granularity on our uses is because in order to construct a useful survey question, we may need to have a list of items for people to choose from, which means that in advance of sending this to a vendor, we have to have an idea of what we want to include. So I think that's why I was talking about that.
Agree with that. And we may need to have some definitions, to your point, as well, in the survey.
Yes.
Right back
Yes.
to what is a green space and what does that mean to you? And so that we're using the same, but yeah, the same words and the correct words relative to whatever we decide they are. But yeah, mini park versus single use park, that's pretty obvious, but we need to define those in the survey, I guess, at some point.
And I think what I would like to see is, as we've talked, you know, well, what does green space mean to you? And I don't want to ask the village, what does green space mean to you? Because then we'll just have an inventory of what people's definition is. I think what would be more useful is based on our ordinance, as has been pointed out today, is in a question to say, if the definition of green space is X, do you want that? Right? And if the definition of greenway is X, do you want that? And on that greenway, what activities do you want, right? Or do you want nothing at all? So I think that those definitions, if we incorporate them into the question, will result in much more efficient and informative answers rather than just getting sort of an inventory of what green space means to people as a word. So we will need, in order to create the survey, we will need to tackle some of those definitions ourselves. But of course, like we've already talked about, the ordinance definition can guide us, and also some of the definitions pulled from the existing document, because I am not trying to reinvent the wheel.
I just want to ask one quick question on definitions, and maybe John, you might be able to help with this. If I saw the idea about a definition of a school district park, I realized, you know, I want to understand, how does that fall within our, we've got Marvin Elementary, which now does have a lot of recreational activity, you know, they have, you know, leagues and sports on that big open field, but it's not, it's in Marvin, but it's not the village. What does that mean for us as far as, do we count it, do we not, as far as scope?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, most of the schools other than Marvin Elementary are actually not in Marvin. So they're, you know, still under the county. So, you know, we've actually had some different conversations in the past with some of the schools, like there's a field in front of Sandy Ridge, you know, is that something that we might be able to use for programming or something like that? And at least in the past, that there hasn't been, you know, much cooperation between, because of course it's the county that owns and manages all the school properties. So, you know, I think it's important because they are serving the village of Marvin to some degree. So when we talk about active versus passive recreation, you know, Marvin Eford being what we refer to as a passive park, you know, if you looked at the complex in the heart of Marvin, which is, you know, the high school and middle school and all the different things in there. I think you put that into the balance of what we have as active recreation, but, you know, we also don't have any, you know, areas other than for soccer shots, you know, that we've done at Marvin Eford. But we don't have areas for active recreation within Marvin itself, you know, so.
Marvin Elementary, that's what I'm saying, is that not counted because they have lacrosse teams practicing, they have soccer, flag football every weekend. So is that not, because that's organized recreation in Marvin, but yet it happens to be on the Marvin Elementary School ground.
We have no involvement in that
Okay.
happening.
Yeah,
so
I
we
think
can't
it's more
really
what
count
we
that
can
as
impact.
Our
Well,
programming.
it's not our program, but I'm saying if you were to survey folks and say, do we need recreational parks? Someone may say, well, I see there's a league every day in the middle of Marvin, so I don't need another recreational park. That's why I'm just wondering, how do you
Mhm.
distinguish it? Because it's.
Well, and that, I think your question is exactly why I had a little bit of trouble with these classifications for the
Mhm.
parks as written, because we don't have that kind of agreement with the schools
Even
for
the-
our programming,
Okay.
but yes, it exists.
And
Yeah.
it's in the town of Marvin.
And that
Well,
is something we need to
You see, there's a
inventory.
lot of people, whether they're in the Marvin or not in Marvin, they go to schools. You don't know if your neighbor's in Marvin or out of Marvin a lot of times, and a lot of times they don't even know themselves. You know, we had a lot of folks on election day show up, thought they could vote for, you know, Marvin officials, you know, when we had the local elections, and they were turned away because they were in Marvin, you know?
Yeah, because
so.
the schools serve much wider than
Okay.
Marvin.
Thank
And
you.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
want to make sure I understood is that it's here, we recognize it, but it's not
Mhm.
considered an asset, yet it is still serving our residents.
Correct.
And that's something that we sort of have to struggle with in inventory is that, you know, there are country clubs where people can play tennis. So how much demand is there for tennis outside of that?
A lot of residential neighborhoods have their own courts.
You know,
or
have their own courts or
pools
their own
things like
pools or
that.
whatever. So do we actually need to supplement those with
That's what I'm-
taxpayer money?
Right, exactly.
Or, you know, grants? Or is that something that we skip because there's really not that much demand in the community?
But
So
you're
I think
also
we have to
trying to
be careful.
serve, there's a lot of residents in Marvin that are not in a subdivision.
Yes.
You know, so they
Or
don't
have
have those
have no
type of
amenities.
resources or
Mhm.
programming or things like that. So, you know, that's the balance that we're trying to do to provide things that'll benefit all the residents.
All right, so turning to the survey, because, you know, we do want to try to get out of here under 2 hours this time. So there are a number of questions on the existing survey that already, you know, ask about parks. They're not currently in an order that sort of goes from like general to more specific. They're kind of, you know, mixed all over. So, you know, unless, you know, without kind of having, you know, the current survey in front of you, you know, this might not be super helpful. But, you know, some of the questions on here are greenways, walking trails important to you? I mean, I think it's an important question. Is, you know, what connectivity and walkability important to you, blah, blah, blah. So if you've had an opportunity to look through these, did you take any notes that indicated, you know, a question that's already on here that you find wonky or needs to be better defined? I mean, we're going to add to this a little bit, but is there anything already on here? Christina, I know you have copious notes on the survey. Did you have any of the existing ones?
One quick note, if I may, whenever we do get to the point where we select a vendor that will distribute the survey, they will do one final review to make sure the questions make sense. There's no subjectivity, there's no leading questions. Just want to.
Yeah, my comment about them not going in general to specific is just, it makes it harder right now for us mentally to
Gotcha.
inventory what's here and what's not, because they're kind of scattered all over. I know the vendor will clean that up and make it make it cool.
So will they also advise on the number of questions, the number of open-ended, I assume all
That's
that,
a
right?
cost,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
and
okay.
They should be able to advise on, this is vague, this is subjective, this is not defined, it needs a definition, or you're explaining too much and you're leading someone in one way or the
Or
other.
you can't do anything with the data you collect, so why?
Correct.
why ask that question? Yeah, they will give us feedback on that.
Okay.
So I don't, if Christina, do you have any notes on that, on the existing ones?
Existing, I just had questions here and there, but I think to Austin's point, a lot of that will be cleared up by
Okay.
professionals.
Yes.
My bigger questions were, and we talked about what does green space mean, but what we were talking about earlier, I think could work that out. Here's a definition, and is that important to you? Kind
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
thing. And so we have to decide what that means. And because I hear back and forth, green space is important, but let's just face it, not near me, kind of thing. The one I had too is, are you a current member of a Y, a swim club, a tennis club, anything like that, any kind of recreational type organization? Like I belong to the Y in Indian Land, sorry, but it's the closest one and it's great. And if somebody belongs to that, they're already putting skin in the game, money in the game, that they're interested in something like that. Therefore, we don't have one of those, or that might be something that could convey over. We've talked a lot about community centers. I think some more questions about that sort of thing, albeit that's a very expensive project, but still, is that something people are interested in? I don't know.
Well, I think that's a good question that could, depending on how the vendor, phrases it or whatever, maybe it's split into two parts, is number one, to your point, that indicates that they have an interest in that. On the other hand, if they already have a membership, they don't really need more here for us to be paying for. So
That you can look at it that way too, of course.
we'll have to
right?
figure out a way to parse out that different, but I just made a note on that question.
But the other thing too, and I'm not sure how you do this, but I wrote down dollar signs. It's sort of the splash pad idea that, yeah, I want a splash pad. Well, that costs a lot of money, right? I mean, not just to build it, but to maintain it. And then, well, we won't even get into the icky parts. But I feel like we need to put some, I don't know, bumpers, guardrails around certain things that, yeah, you may want this, but this is a really expensive thing to want.
So
A
we
pool,
do,
a giant pool is
so
very expensive.
we do have a disclaimer at the top of the survey that says, please keep in
Yeah.
mind that projects may require a tax increase as we're operating within an 8-cent tax rate. It is important to note that it's not a very feasible thing to put costs on projects just because costs change, they're affected by inflation. Doing multiple projects together gets you economies of scale. It's you
Yeah,
don't want to give anybody a survey to where you set up a false expectation, because in the end, whenever you get to the point where you bid a project out, maybe 2 years down the line, that price could dramatically change depending on the economy and what else you're doing at the time.
I have a suggestion, and obviously, once again, defer to the vendors. But for example, question number 6 on the existing list is, would you like to see more parks, open space, or recreation options in Marvin? And there's a yes, no. And then a follow-up to that would be, does your opinion change if they are taxpayer funded or if they are paid for by a developer or via a grant?
And often grants require a match. So
Yes, they do.
Mhm.
But the wording of that can be specific to that. And those are two separate questions. Does your opinion change on wanting those things if taxpayers are funding them? And if somebody else is paying for it is a separate question.
Yeah.
but I would also separate those three things. They are three very different, well, at least the recreation option to me is very different than a park,
Yes.
technically.
I know that the group that started working on the survey
Yes.
has really kind of gone through that kind of argument or discussion. So I think it's certainly, appropriate for us to add that. But I think that disclaimer at the front was kind of,
that was sort of their best effort of trying to meet that.
to weigh,
Mhm.
making sure that the residents, as they go through this, are connecting the dots that, I think we're pretty, intelligent folks by and large in Marvin. So, I think there's some natural understanding that anything is going to cost some money, even when we get land donated,
Right.
right?
But when you're
We're
taking a
generally
survey and
on
you're
the hook
presented with a list of very, shiny options to, like what Christina was suggesting, people go, oh yeah, I want that,
Well,
Want,
I
want,
think part
want,
of it
want,
is
yes.
for us to just gauge
Mhm.
where their priorities are amongst
Exactly.
those things.
Exactly.
All these things cost money. It's just, what does the village want us to prioritize one over the other,
So I
And
agree
that
with
brings up a point of, and I don't know if there's questions in here like this, but that you prioritize a list. What is the most important thing to you versus the least? Those are really hard to answer, but man, you really put some thought into it when you have to think about it that way.
And
I
that was
like,
actually one of the suggestions on my list here. So to your point with question 6, would you like to see more parks, open spaces, or recreation options? Maybe that's 3 sort of separate questions,
yeah.
each one with the caveat of, does your opinion change if you have to pay for it? And that's not what I'm saying, is that once this is organized in a more, hierarchical fashion,
Yeah.
it gets a little easier to sort of realize that we're addressing these things. And then question number 8 is way too, it's what improvements would you like to see everywhere? And so I think once again, that needs to be broken down. And that's why I was kind of getting a little bit into that granularity of what do you want to see on the trails? What does that list look like? And then to your point, if we develop more trails and have a definition of greenway as having, a transportation aspect, what of these menu options are you interested in? Rank them and another. Right? Like rank them and another in case anybody has a fun write-in that we haven't contemplated. But for each of those areas of concern for the trails, do you want dog waste stations? Do you want fitness trails? Do you want benches? Do you want them for walking? Do you want them for biking? And rank them. And then another question, a generic one at the top of all of that, to your point about are you a member of a rec center or like that, is do you actually use our trails and parks currently?
That's a very good
I
question.
think I look at number 8, and that's almost a question that you could take something in that format and make it more of a priority. I think we've also, though, just gotta recognize
We
the
can't have
longer you
yes,
make
we can't make it too
surveys,
long.
the less of a chance that you're gonna get as many responses.
That
So
was the point I was gonna make, yeah.
Yeah,
so
well-
you have to have that balance, of getting to the point and trying to elicit the feedback that's going to be most effective coming from the residents with,
Once again, with vendor
getting the-
input, for sure, absolutely. I
But-
mean,
but I
when they
do-
say, oh, this will take 30 seconds, you're more likely to do the survey than if it's a 10-minute one.
Also, the complexity of questions can cause people not to finish them. If you give them a ranked choice question where you're giving them 20 things to rank,
Oh, no.
Oh,
the
no, I'm
analysis
not
causes
doing that.
paralysis. No.
And any
And
ranked
so-
choice, you make it like the last one.
right,
Because
but
use them
What I
selectively
am
with a limited number of
anticipating
choices.
though is that when I was reading number 8, what improvements would you like to see everywhere? That's not super helpful. So I think there needs to be a park, a trail, and a greenway section, and we can keep those as condensed and focused as possible. But before we get to, I think there's an old saying that, I wrote a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one. To start with, we're going to have a laundry list, and then we're going to shrink it down
Yeah.
to what it is. So we can create kind of a big list, and then we can figure out where we're redundant or where that information wouldn't really be useful.
If we are going to do some ranked choice, and I don't know how much the survey group has considered that,
I'd keep
but
that
I
limited.
would almost consider it as maybe 2 sections. One maybe being toward just the municipal stuff in
Yes.
general, right?
Yes.
The roads, security, those things, right?
Yep.
And then one that I wouldn't even necessarily get into the granularity of greenways, parks, and I would have components of those in there
Mhm.
because that's going to tell us which one, if you put a separate one for greenways and a separate one for parks, you still don't know how they're weighing one of those versus the other. Whereas if you have
Mhm.
different components of those things under that, I think you'll get a better idea of where they would prioritize, the different
Yes and no.
things.
I agree with your point about we need to get more information about the prioritization of how we group them. There's just some things that we might want to get information about that, like, what do you want to use the trails for is a very different question of how do you value trails? So we'll have to get into that.
Two
yes.
quick notes.
We're at an
If you have,
hour. We're over an hour.
this is your first time. your
This
first
is our time
warning.
check.
About 45 minutes left to get through the rest of the agenda. The other thing is, if you guys think of specific questions, send them to me. I can keep them in a running document as questions that the board is considering. We can go back and start parsing through these questions individually. I feel like we're not going to make as much progress if we just talk about the questions. We can start writing them down. So, think about today's discussion, write out some questions, send them to me in an email. I'll compile them. We can have them at the next meeting to further discussion. We can kind of curate from there.
Also, can you remind us the timeframe again? You haven't selected a vendor, the survey to go out. What it kind of?
So it's a little up in the air still, because the first thing we need to do is the board has to finish their review of the plan and the survey questions, and we'll go from there. I imagine the next step would be to, once once the board finishes their review on both the survey and the plan, that it will go back, it's currently slated to go back to the council. Right now, we have that in somewhere March, April, depending on how long the board takes, that may need to be delayed. We'll go back to the council, they'll parse through it again, they'll get the survey into the form they like. And then we would look towards contracting with a vendor, very likely Central Lino, we've used them before. It would move towards distribution. We would do a collection period for the survey of, I don't know, a month or two, maybe. Don't take what I'm saying is gospel here. That's very tentative and could change. And then they would generate a report, come to a council meeting, do a presentation, present the results. We would then take those results and then move towards the full rewrite of the plan or updating it in areas. What do you think, John?
Well, I would say one of the most important things we hope to get out of this is, some direction as and when it comes to budgeting and stuff like that and setting priorities. Now, certainly I don't see that happening because we're already starting to get into budgeting season for this fiscal year. But I think it's more realistic to think that, it's probably something that, at least from a budgeting perspective, that we'll be able to have done the right way and, with all of our due diligence, and also, even once you get the results and the feedback, you still have to interpret them to some degree, and turn them into actionable items. So, I would say you wouldn't have the expectation that we're going to have anything for this budgeting, cycle, but certainly for next, I think that's a realistic.
I think we would we would not enter a contract with the vendor till at least July, just so we're in the next fiscal year.
Yeah.
To make sure we're in budget. Then you wouldn't see any you would probably take.
We'd still actually have to budget for the survey.
Yes, and that's not going to be that bad. We know what that's going to cost. We're going to plan for that in our budget meetings coming up. You'd execute a contract somewhere probably in the July, August timeframe, 2 month collection. You're probably looking at Q4 of this year for results to come in probably at the earliest, depending on how much longer we take with our portion and how long the council takes.
And that would give us sufficient time, before the next budget season to have the public then ingest the results and have appropriate time to give feedback and things like that.
But then again, I guess something could come up in the budget, and I don't think that maybe, hey, not the pickleball, some example that's still in the survey, we may or may not make a decision for this year, correct? I mean, some items you're gonna say, this is too important, we need to hear the survey results versus something that's just.
One more thing I forgot to mention is the council has asked us to take the survey to the planning board as well. So that board will get a stab to look at the survey. See if there's any questions they want to add. Maybe they don't have really much to add. Maybe they want to take a deep dive. And I know that some people may think that we're taking too long on this. The point of this is to be extremely thorough. So we're taking our time. We're making sure the survey's in the best form possible. We're setting up as many helpful questions as possible. We want to make sure that the report that we get back from this is representative, that it's comprehensive, and that we have guidance for the next few years. Because we might do one survey every 5 years, maybe more, maybe less, just depending on how things go.
So because we're, we do need to move on to the other stuff, just to sort of reframe what we've done today, because it did seem to sort of wander and maybe we seem to get into the weeds a little bit and back. But I'm actually glad that we covered some of that, because it will get we have uncovered, like, we have some issues about definitions. So we know we need to address some definitions, right? So that's important for us to know so that we can tackle it and when you're confronting this stuff or you're coming up with survey questions, now you know kind of where we need more focus. And that when we are coming up with survey questions, we are going to have to start giving some thought a little bit to the granularity of what we want to have people selecting from. that we think represents Marvin to
Mhm.
get people's priorities, but then it also to keep in mind that we are going to have to be very efficient with our questions because of length of survey, planning board, municipal questions, all has to be housed in the same document. So like I said, we may come up with a big list at first and narrow it down because we will just compile everybody's thoughts. I will start a running document of the existing questions that deal with us from the current list.
Mhm.
And then that way, none of them are redundant, and I can add the ones that I've already come up with. Christina can add the ones she's come up with.
You guys have a copy of the survey in your agenda packet. Look at those questions. Send me, you can email me, you can email Jen. The questions you have, we can just keep a document running that I can just tack onto the agenda each meeting. And then hopefully 2, 3 meetings from now, we're in good shape. That'd be my goal.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great plan. So like I said, we did wander a bit, but I think it brought up a lot of the good points that we need to be considering. What definitions do you have for your spaces? How do you want to see your parks? What uses do you think we should be looking at? We got an opportunity to look at this map. And like I said, we will be working on that. So any feedback over the interim and any questions that come up, please do send them our way and we have 2 living documents. One will be the survey questions and one will be sort of our parameters that we would send to a vendor. And we're just sort of building that up. And like Austin said, in a couple of meetings, we should be ready to move those, look at an actual document, make some refinements, and then send them out to vendors. Or to the planning board or whoever. All right, so unless there's any last follow-up on that, we're going to move on to new business, which I think we're gonna be able to get through pretty quickly. So Davey, we have Marvin Loop Trail needs a little bit of work.
It does, and this is the Marvin Loop Trail that currently exists. And I've only been here a little over a year with Marvin, but haven't nailed down the exact age of the trail itself. But from what we've determined, it's 15 years or older trail. And the trail itself is still usable on a daily basis, but it has cracked over time in several areas. There has been some treatments performed, well, I believe fog sealing and maybe some crack sealing over time. But some, more cracks have come about as well since then. So in saying that, there was some discussion, this has been about a year, council's been discussing how to treat that portion of the trail. Should it be maintenance? Are we looking at resurfacing, maybe even reconstructing that portion of the trail? If you recall, about this time last year, that whenever we'd have a heavy rain event, there would be a couple of portions of that trail that would stay underwater. Typically through the wooded area along Marvin School Road and Joe Kerr Road. So a stormwater study assessment was performed on those 2 areas. And from that study, it was determined that there was some areas that the Department of Transportation could address in their right of way that may alleviate some of those areas or some of those issues. There were some discussions held with DOT. They agreed that there were some things they could do. So they came in and made some improvements. And to date, we've not had any issues with the trail flooding since then.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's worked out well. So now that we feel like we've got that issue behind us, council has been has requested that we come back to them with options on trail maintenance, just going in and fixing the spot fixes, the areas that need them the most now. Provide an option for or a cost for if we want to resurface the current trail with asphalt and then one with concrete. And so in your packet, I brought these 3 options to council at their last meeting. And the point repair again would be crack sealing and fog sealing and addressing areas where maybe root intrusion has caused the asphalt to raise and crack, which would be a tripping hazard. In order to address those areas, we're looking at a cost of about $10,000. If we're looking to resurface the entire area with asphalt itself, you would need to mill it, then add a top layer of asphalt to it. The cost of it would be $177,232. And then option 3 is we've had a concrete contractor provide us a price for just building it back in concrete. And that cost increased dramatically to $964,700. So when brought these options to council at their last meeting, they discussed those options and felt like option 2 would work for them. They would like to see it resurfaced, but that was contingent based on this board looking at that option and giving your feedback and see if y'all are okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and certainly going way back to when the loop was initially constructed, I know even at that time, you know, there were cost estimates for both concrete and asphalt that were weighed then. And I would say that back then, that delta, there was a significant delta, but not even nearly. I don't know what's going on with the concrete, but
industry right now?
but
Yeah.
yeah, so we kind of ruled that one out.
Yeah, I mean, I think
kind of right away.
Yeah.
We also considered the fact that, you know, when we look back, we've only had a public works department in place for the last couple of years, really, that we could even address things. Now, we did do some maintenance, and I can't remember the exact year where we did some crack sealing and things like that.
Mhm.
But when you consider the fact that there really hasn't been much maintenance, that we have had some issues affecting us, like some of the DOT caused flooding and things like that, that created some of the bad areas of it. Really, you know, if it's 15 to 17 years that we've kind of gotten out of a good chunk of that trail with the asphalt, I don't know that we'd even do a whole lot better with the concrete necessarily, you know? So, and then we certainly considered also, do we do, you know, the smaller amount, just patching again, you know? But one of the things that we discussed is that some of the areas where we've got some tree and root concerns, things of that nature, each year we kind of go by and put kind of Band-Aids on. Are we throwing good money after bad when we really do need to kind of address the thing? So, you know, I just wanted to share with you a little bit, I think what our reasoning was, and correct me if I'm wrong with any of that, Davey, but yeah, certainly you could go back and listen to the discussion that we had and kind of how we ended up here. But certainly if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them on behalf, not myself, but on behalf of the board as council as best.
So
I
we
can.
are looking for a formal recommendation here. This matter has been referred to the PR&G board. So you do have a motion in your system that has all 3 options.
Mhm.
So following your discussion, we just ask that the board make a motion to do one of the recommendations.
Okay.
Couple questions on that. One is that consistent with what the plans are for the remaining part of Marvin Loop was going to be asphalt, correct? Or will that change the outcome?
It's mostly planned to be asphalt. There might be certain areas for whatever reason that might need to change materials,
There's
but
going to be a couple of, there may be for route save zones,
Mhm.
there may be some boardwalk sections.
Okay.
Mhm.
But based on this price difference,
Mhm.
I can almost
It
guarantee
wasn't concrete wasn't planned.
that concrete is not going to be.
I think we're getting a quote when they're doing the engineering, and we may
Yeah.
get construction quotes for concrete, but if it's indicative of this,
That's right.
We're
It's different.
still in engineering right now. We'll be moving towards right-of-way acquisition soon, and construction's not slated, I think, for at least another year. But you're not going to have a lot of concrete here.
So it would be
yeah.
consistent with likely what's going to be the rest of the loop. And I guess the other question
Correct.
I have in raising this is I understand, as you said, we've been fortunate to have the years, but would that allow us to further expand the Marvin Loop versus reinvesting, you know, adding to the overall surface? Again, I guess the budget you have here for the middle section, to re-asphalt everything, could that be further applied to accelerating the completion of the Marvin Loop or other
So
things?
not really. The expansion that we have planned currently is grant funded. We don't want to intermingle those funds. It becomes an administrative nightmare. There'll be a third of the left loop, a third to a fourth left to complete. We just don't have funding for that right now. We've applied for a grant for that. We have not heard any update on that yet.
And
Yeah.
Andy actually brought up, and it was a good idea and kind of challenged, well, when we're doing that part of the Marvin Loop, is it cheaper and more efficient for us to have them do that part too? But that again is where you go into the commingling of the funds that are specifically dedicated for that other project. You know, and it just didn't really seem to make sense, especially, you know, that being, you know, continued another couple of
And
years out.
To my understanding, the expansion project will have to go out for a separate bidding process, whereas this is something that we could complete with our contractor that we have. We have an asphalt contract that'll last 3 years. Is that correct, Davey? It's 3 years?
Yes, and it's an inclusive contract.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the concern is that if we don't do it under this contract, when we get a new contract, you know, all costs are certainly going to go up again. So it's not going to get any cheaper to do it than now. And, you know, the way costs have been going up for most everything, you know, it could be significant. So if you go back to the tape, we did weigh that as well.
So my take on this is obviously concrete out. So really it comes down to patch or asphalt. And while patching is obviously a whole lot cheaper, as everyone's already noted, you know, there gets to be a point where you can no longer just keep throwing Band-Aids on things. I would hate to patch. And so a couple considerations is number one, I mean, keep patching, we're just throwing good money after bad. If we don't do something about it, we potentially have, you know, safety and liability issues if the surface gets even worse. So we definitely need to address it. And if we're going to, in the next year or so, have the next section, the grant funded section, done, it would be very nice if instead of one section being all patchwork and the other section looking all new, that at least within a year or two of each other, the whole thing looks brand spanking shiny new, and then they can be on the same maintenance schedule.
Yeah.
So that the next time we have to do this, we're not talking about, oh, well, this one's not really like, then we have the economy of scale to maintain them at the same time. It would be lovely if we could fold in that northeast that northeast corner now, but we're just not ready. And to wait until then, I think doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I am open to contrary positions.
Christina.
Yes.
I have to go back a few steps. Where does the $177,000 come from? Do we have that budgeted somewhere?
I am not the finance director, so I do not feel comfortable answering that question.
I don't think it's something immediate. I think it's something we would be budgeting for as part of the
Yeah.
process.
I believe that'd be in our budget. Or Davey, were we talking about using Powell bill funds for this?
Yeah, most of it's going to be funded through Powell bill, but there's been funds that have been set aside just for this project to meet that amount if needed, if it's approved. So, but the majority would be Powell bill funding.
Yeah, we have been accruing money for maintenance and things like that. So yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
So just to move things along a little bit, so the board is in agreement, no concrete.
No concrete.
Okay. So,
Go ahead.
Christine, well, I guess I know I don't want to commingle, but when we talk about safety, and I understand we're talking safety routes, I think we still have the open safety issue of accessing the Marvin Loop with the lack of crosswalks. And I know this is different, but I also feel like I don't want to undermine that when we just pave it over, but we still have access issues of crossing Joe Cart to get to the.
so
It
unfortunately,
will
that's.
just surface exactly what we have now.
No, I
So
understand, but
yeah.
I'm just saying, when I hear safety, my bigger safety is getting hit crossing the street than tripping on a route. I think, you know, and I'm just.
Well, of course, but
Unfortunately, it's a separate issue.
I know
We
it is
we
separate.
do not own Joe Carr Road. That is an NCDOT road. There's been talks in the past for cost sharing for a pedestrian refuge. HOAs have said they're not interested in cost sharing with us. So that's just, it's just kind of out there. maybe down the line, maybe when we're looking at that last leg of it. But right now, it's not something that's in our budget and we don't have control over the road.
Yeah, and I share
Okay.
your
No,
concerns
I-
with them
I'm sorry,
crossing
so I
that.
have to
No,
think
no,
that
it-
If we're gonna invest almost $1 million into a loop that I still feel is unsafe to
Mhm.
access, we need to keep that, aware.
Well, when you say invest $1 million,
No, it's the repair, whatever that was.
the repair is 177 if it's the
Oh,
asphalt.
I'm sorry, sorry.
The $1 million is the
That was
concrete
I
option.
apologize.
Yep.
Yes, but still, regardless, if we're doing an invest, let's make sure that we're keeping it safe.
No, and I agree. My counter consideration to that is that if the repairs need to be done, the repairs need to be done.
Yeah. And
So it's
what I
going to
would
suck up
add
money
is
one
that
way or another.
what I would add is that what you're talking about certainly is on council's radar. And I believe, in the proposed section, there was where we're probably going to be moving across Marvin Road, over onto like the Firethorn side there. So we're going to eventually have to address some of these crosswalks and stuff anyway, but it's certainly on the radar and something we've discussed. Yeah.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make sure you were clear because that's important.
Reading it prior to that was the number that stuck, but
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's an important thing. Yes, Christina.
Between option 1 and option 2, is one of them more detrimental to the existing trees that are, and large plants that are there?
Yes, resurfacing it is probably going to more likely cause encounters with the existing trees than patching. I'm just gonna go out on a limb and make that assumption.
Davey, would resurfacing involve pushing any tree roots back or moving any tree roots? I'm not familiar with the process, and I know the board probably has that question.
Yeah, the quote is for, excuse me, for milling about 1.5 inches of the current existing asphalt. And so you would just be milling the top of it and then resurfacing the
And then
top of
resurfacing.
it. So
We're
you're
not
not
talking
really,
about taking out any perimeter trees to prevent encroachment or on it in the future or anything like
Not
that.
in-
It's literally just applying a new coat
that's correct.
on top.
Although
Yeah, but if you-
although I do think, and we discussed this, is we want to be more proactive and not, because that trail was just kind of put out there and left. Some of the roots we're having problems with weren't even trees when it was originally there. So we need to do some more proactive work around the sides of it so we don't develop root problems, and we address that with maybe some, smaller trees that are that close to the pathway. So I would say that is a direction. Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting at. So trees have been growing there for 15 years. That could have some pretty significant roots under that trail. And it sounds like they're in it, they're breaking through the trail. So when you go through and mill that, you're cutting up those roots. A tree can handle some of that, but I'm just asking if option 1 or option 2 is going to be more detrimental to the roots that are probably there.
I'm guessing that option 2 will be more detrimental to the roots. I mean, just based on what you just described,
Yeah, although, how much did you say it's going to be milled? 1/2 inch?
1.5 inches.
1.5 inches. So what would you say it is now? About 4 inches, the base?
It's probably a 2-inch.
2-inch base?
I would imagine about 2 inches in thickness, maybe. It may be 3. I don't exactly know. I haven't.
Yeah, I don't know if the roots, the roots are obviously going to more freely grow under what the existing blacktop is there. And that's what kind of, causes it to raise a little bit. So, I would think as long as you're not taking out all of the asphalt, I think you're really kind of limiting what you're getting down into the roots. I'm not an expert on that, but.
My thought is that because in option 1, you're going to be grinding up near where the roots have popped through, right? It may be just as detrimental option 1 as option 2. It's what I'm
possibly.
I think it's, yeah. And so while, again, I'm always going to look at things from the plant's perspective and the environment's perspective, I'm not sure that there's a huge difference there. as long as we're not taking out trees because they're too close to the trail. That just seems counterintuitive to me, that they were there. That is the reason we're walking around, is to see the
Right.
trees.
Yeah, some of them though weren't there first, you
Well,
know.
no,
and-
they're gonna be, yeah, I get that,
Yeah.
but they're gonna keep growing and planting themselves, you know.
There hasn't
need to
been any
prepare for that.
discussion to
The good
remove
thing.
trees, though.
Do you
Say
want
that
to,
again?
Yeah,
There hasn't been
so
any
let's-
discussion to remove any of
Good.
the
Okay.
current trees.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
I
about
don't know if you
20
were able to hear, Davey was saying there's no proposal to remove any trees. So in order to advance with the agenda, I think all of those are good points. Christina, which option are you in favor of?
I think for overall trail safety, number 2 is probably the better one.
Deb,
Number 2.
number 2, Michael? Number 2? All right, so I move that, how do we want to phrase this motion? What?
It's in your system. Read it out loud and someone can text that mood if you want.
Yeah, please do. I gotta switch my page.
my mic was not on. The motion in your system would be to recommend option 2, asphalt resurfacing at a cost not to exceed 177,232, including a 10% contingency.
So moved. Do I hear a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, unanimous. Awesome. Thank you for reading that because my screen was not coming up showing me the verbiage. All right. Fantastic. All right, let's move on to Tyler, you have 70% Village Hall Park plans. Do you want the con or?
Yeah, I mean, real quick, you'll see these in front of you. They're called 70% plans. From Dewberry, the way I understand it, these are honestly more like 95% plans just because they had to take it a step further for permitting and review. That's currently where we're at in the project. They have sent it off for permitting and review. And these plans, everything, took it to the design committee, and then I'm bringing it here for you all to look at and review. I know, like, if you have it and you see page down there in the right-hand corner, C101, that gives a pretty good or a decent overlay of some of more landscaping and what will be there and what won't be there. You'll notice one of the, like, you'll see tree buffer root zone barriers. It's showing some of the trees that are staying, some of the trees that won't. It's just quick, high level. There is one small request, question, issue. I have set up a call tomorrow with my contact at Dewberry to kind of discuss part of the pond in the front. But other than that, you'll notice they've made some changes. The trail surface, you'll see, is turned into a loop. Sidewalk on that side of the building, loop into the front with an extension out into the yard for ADA accessibility to the bathrooms here in the front of the building. Yeah. So if there's any, I don't know if you guys have had any time to like look it over, if there's any questions, anything y'all want to say, and if y'all want to, take this home with you and keep looking at it, there's.
Well, do have we're kind of behind schedule on this a little bit, are we not?
Yeah, but we are at the point where we still have a couple weeks. We're waiting
We do have-
on for reviews to come back. Now, these plans, if there's any recommendation, I would love to have it soon. So I could get that over to our design and engineers.
Yeah, Christina?
Is there a plant list somewhere? I'm looking.
Yeah, it's.
Page 1,912 or something.
Yeah, and it's,
I
yeah,
can't find
third word down on the tiny font.
If you'll
I-
just send that to me, we don't have to talk about it here. I just like to see the plant list. And you said something about the pond in the front. Is that a rain garden?
It's very last page, by the way. The plants
Oh.
on the very last page.
Very last page.
Very,
Okay.
very end. Yeah, dry pond in the front,
Okay.
like a
cool.
rain garden. Yeah,
Rain
yeah, yeah.
garden. Yeah. Rain garden.
And these plans, you'll see where it shows like, on one of the pages, it'll have the piping running to the underground cistern that takes it down. It's pretty high level in here.
Oh, I like the plant list.
Yeah, so on page L101 has got a patchwork of, where the plants are going in the rain garden. And then, yeah, you found the plant list on the last page. The only thing I want to bring to everyone's attention is just, to close the loop on, last time our comments were, we needed to protect the really big oak trees out there, except that one of them was discovered to have been diseased. And so that one is no longer in the plan for protection, but its immediate neighbor is. And so that one on C101 is shown as part of the demolition plan, is to take out the diseased one. But all of the neighboring ones are still there. When I looked at these earlier, in committee, I noticed that the lawn area now extends underneath the tree that is not being removed. And so we have asked them to redraw that contour so that it's still mulched under the tree, and to expand the root save zone that's designated for construction, where the root save fencing goes. So we have already noted, like, if you look at this later and you're like, hey, the lawn goes right under that tree, we've already noted that and requested that change. The change we had requested before, where there was a concrete trail around the lawn, is now shown as a more natural permeable surface as requested, with a small concrete connector directly to Village Hall from the lawn in lieu to provide, a solid surface access. So it's a much shorter bit of concrete now. All of the piping for the cistern and so on is probably above most of our pay grade or concern. The water quantities and flow and stuff like that. The one concern that Councilmember Wortman had is that the suspenders and belt emergency overflow for that rain garden, if all these other, drains and pipes and whatever are insufficient to contain a flow, there's an overflow. And it's, if you're looking at C3.01, that overflow is to the left of center on the pond. And he was sort of concerned about the grading at that particular location. And we'll be talking to them about moving it to the right-hand end of the pond and directing it to the swale that directs to the right of Village Hall when you're looking at the front doors, instead of the swale to the left where the concrete connector to the lawn would be. Just because it seemed like then we have a sort of a culvert issue. So those are the changes that have already been sort of requested, and Christina can, and all of us can look at the plant list and make comments. Like Tyler indicated, we have a couple of weeks. So are there any questions about?
And I'll also note, like, talking about plant list and plantings and stuff, that is something we did do a scope amendment. So we have the landscaping and like planting is going to be on us. This is just a high level kind of location and recommendation. We will have heavier say there towards the end of the project. I'd say, shoot, in a couple months.
This is provisionary, the plants.
That will fall
specifics,
heavily on
yeah.
PRG, the planting,
That'll
and
come back.
so that will be something that comes back with a lot of detail, and that will require a whole meeting probably about, but yes.
All right.
And Jen, I appreciate the mulch around the tree and all the impervious surface and all that you mentioned there. That makes a huge difference. That's much better. And you had mentioned
Yeah,
that
we're
before,
trying
so that's
to
good.
we're incrementally trying to work towards, it being as drainable and friendly as possible.
Drainable.
So, all right, barring any other questions or comments, then we will move on to our last new business item. Palami, you have some changes for us.
Hi, everybody. So last order of business, we're going to repeal and replace the rules of procedures. They have been updated recently, and we both thought it was time to kind of get them updated. So they're basically pretty much the same. Everything is really not much has changed. So if you want to look through the new rules and procedures, it'll make yourself feel very smart because you know everything already. So one.
One thing I just wanted to add, it's probably been upwards of 10 years since these rules were actually formally updated to be much more inclusive of recent changes in state law. They're in the form recommended now by the School of Government. You can keep going.
So we use the 2020 edition by Trey Allen and A. Fleming Bell II. And I'm just going to go over some of the big changes that we have. So one of the big changes is that during a motion, we'll no longer need to second. So you can just make a motion and then all vote, which is really nice. That'll
Yes.
save us about 2 minutes. And then another thing is there is a consent agenda, which is, if everyone knows, it's a grouping of items that are approved in one motion that are relatively non-controversial in nature. So like simple things.
You guys will almost never have one. It's in your toolkit in case you ever do. But the planning board has the same thing in their toolkit. They've only used it one time, and that was when they adopted text amendments, like dozens upon dozens of ones to be consistent with changes in state law. So you guys will likely never see it, but it's in your toolkit if we ever need it.
Okay.
Another new thing is that the board is able to hold public hearings, although we rarely will, but you are able to hold them, so it's nice to have
Okay.
the option. And the rules of procedure will also adopt the council's rule for public comment periods and public comments. Those can be found both within the rules and then also in the appendix, which also has some rules about post 2020 and like dialing into
Electronic meetings.
electronically.
You guys have an appendix in your current rules of procedures document that'll be carried over to this one. It's rules for whenever we're in a state of emergency and need to meet entirely remotely. When we're not in a state of emergency, you guys are bound by the policy that was approved by council probably a year or two ago now, which is how Christina is participating remotely today.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Are there any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Cool. So staff is asking the board to repeal and replace the Parks, Recreation, and Greenways Board's rules of procedures.
So moved. Do we hear a
I don't
second?
you don't need a second. Oh, actually, you do need a
I
second. for
do
this.
until they're
Yes,
approved.
you're right.
Approve it, yeah.
Yeah.
Second.
Seconded, all in favor? Aye.
Hi.
All right,
Now you no
passes
longer need
unanimously.
seconds.
No more seconds. All right.
So it's only 2 minutes.
No, right? Over like the entire meeting, maybe. All right. Fantastic. Okay, so having got through the agenda, do we have any action items?
Yes, you all are going to start writing survey questions and sending them to me and Jen. Jen and Christina will keep the running documents going. You include me on the survey questions. We can do a share file or OneDrive, however you guys want to do it, frankly.
Actually, yeah, a shared file where everybody can just get in and add and see what's already there might be.
I'm not tech savvy, but I'm not that tech savvy. But if you guys want to do like a Dropbox or a Google Drive or something where we can just like pop in.
I would say
add
there's
that-
no prohibition on us doing it on a Google Drive for like quorum kinds of.
No,
purposes or
it's
something
just,
like that,
it's
then
one
that
running
would be an easy
document
way.
and the two of you and if it's only, the two of you and myself is not a quorum, so.
Right, okay.
And then we would bring that document, I will attach that document to each meeting and keep it going that way. And that's the only action item that I had.
Okay, and do we have any ongoing action items?
I didn't even think to bring up the list. Hold on one second. I apologize for not being more ready. I don't think we do, but I'm going to double check just to be sure. You're continuing your work on the survey and the master plan. Christina, we still have work on light pollution if you want to send more stuff, up to you.
I'll keep working on it. I can
That's
just,
all.
so, well, yeah, I have a reason why this has been delayed, but go ahead. Keep it on there.
All right, that's it.
All right, awesome. Okay, so before we wrap up, are there any additional board member comments? We've covered a lot of territory today. So, anything? John, anything from you?
No, thank you.
All right. All right, in that case, I move that we adjourn this Parks Rec and Greenway board meeting, February 4th at 10:51 a.m. All in favor? All right. Motion passes unanimously. Enjoy first spring, followed by second winter.
Hey, Austin, I have a question before I leave.
What's that?
Is there a meeting tonight at 6 o'clock?
There is a neighborhood meeting tonight for a conditional rezoning application for the property next door to Village Hall on the other side, next to the parking lot. They're proposing to rezone from rural residential to Heritage District commercial only. So the developer will be here tonight. That is their meeting. That is not ours. So the developer runs that per ordinance. Planning staff, Hunter and Polony will be on site to answer questions to the public regarding like the process. This is just it's a legally required process whenever we receive one of these applications.
Okay, and it's at 6?
What'd you say?
Is it at 6?
It'll be at 6, yes.
Thank you. Oh, I almost put
There's
6
an-
a.m.
There will be another neighborhood meeting on Thursday that is for just a regular rezoning proposal on Marvin School Road across from the elementary school.
Okay,
That's it. That'll be at 6 too.
okay. Thank you.
No problem.
I had some questions from neighbors. Thanks.
No problem.
Yes.
Y'all have a good day.
Bye.